From a humble hackathon to Nigeria's Silicon Valley, today we'll explore the meteoric rise of the organic tech cluster in Yaba, Lagos, where tech companies exploded from a handful to over 100 in less than a decade, attracting remarkable funding and foreign attention. Was it just pure luck, or was it a formula that can be replicated elsewhere? Find out in today's episode of the Flywheel Economics podcast.
Welcome to the Flywheel Economics podcast. Flywheel Economics is a concept that proposes true, sustainable economic growth by viewing economies as ecosystems. I'm your host, Richard O.
And I'm your co-host, Favor Ogbadu. Together, let's explore a more sustainable and powerful way to view innovation, investment, and economic policy making.
Favor, I'm very excited about today's episode. Nigeria's Silicon Valley, Yabacon Valley, Silicon Lagoon, whatever you call it, this is a really promising story that helps to illustrate some of the key principles of flywheel economics.
Yes, Richard, the jury is still out on what exactly should be the appropriate name, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that here in Nigeria, we have a thriving tech cluster, the biggest in Africa.
I can see this is going to be an episode where you show off, Favor, and put Nigeria in its full glory.
Yes.
So I think to start off with, Favor, let's look at what does Yaba look like today? For those listeners who maybe don't know much about Nigeria or Yaba, I think we need to try and paint a bit of a picture of it.
Yes, exactly. And we got to hear from some key players, talking of Wilfred, Ekpo. He's the CEO of Findworka, a company within the tech cluster in Yaba. We also spoke to Onigbinde, someone who has been there from the very beginning. He's the global director of BudgIT. And of course, Femi Longe, the co-founder of CcHub, which was actually a main catalyst for what is now known as the Yaba Tech Cluster.
Wonderful. Well, let's hear from them so that they can maybe help us paint that picture.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think Yaba is a creation by private sector in my view. So there are many things that comes together to make Yaba what it is. Number one is the fact that just the amount of, first, the population is really young. You have so many young people within saying how many kilometers. I think that there are lots of amazing young people who are doing incredible things. And the beauty about this cluster is just how much innovation you're exposed to just because you walked into an event. There are lots of young people, amazing talents within this space. It's just amazing. Every time you hang out at a tech event, much brilliance, how much intelligence you're exposed to just because of the young people willing to apply themselves and who are actively looking for opportunities to push their products, to push their investments. There's also the fact that you have about 2 or 3 universities within a walking distance, really. So you have the Federal College of Education, you have Yaba College of Technology, you have the University of Lagos. Then you have some smaller tech academies starting around Yaba. So I think what makes Yaba special is that you could just walk into some building stuff. I think what makes Yaba special for me is the serendipity, really. Walking on the road and you see someone who interviewed with you some days ago, or someone who's interested in investing in the business, and they're like, hey, hi, we just met at the cinema. That's what makes Yaba special. Just the fact so many builders, so many innovators who live and work within walking distance of each other, basically. I think that's what makes it special. There are a number of things that have been easy to organize. A lot of events that are easy to organize because you just know that you do not have to spend too much on your publicity. For instance, at the business, when we started our physical trainings, we just had a series of open days where a lot of young people come around and speak to members of our faculty. So that was like an onboarding or a marketing pipeline for our training business. So all we just have to do is put out the word, share a few flyers and all that, and then you have people come around to the office because we know that a lot of those people are within maybe 2 kilometers. Yeah.
What we have in Yaba, which is different, is a tech cluster that organically formed around a few key ingredients that were already located within the same environment, but it needed both a spark as well as it needed a guardian of sorts to support it in the early days of its formation, which is the role that CcHub kind of played in the Yaba space. So Yaba is it's vibrant. It's still a vibrant hub. There are way more companies that are now working out of the neighborhood. There are multiple, what's it called, co-working spaces in Yaba right now. So there's more support for startups in the ecosystem that's in and around Yaba now. There are multiple players operating from the space. The Angel Business Network is domiciled there. There are tons of, at one point, Andela, first unicorn from Nigeria, actually started from the space in CcHub and then opened their own campus somewhere in Yaba at one point. So it's evolved beyond CcHub. It's evolved into it's a melting pot still. The universities are still playing a vibrant role and the communities around them are still playing a vibrant role in churning out talent that are working from the space. So the ecosystem is more dynamic. There's a large variety of ideas and problems that people are now building businesses to tackle. There's more in the space in the ecosystem. I think Nigeria is only second to South Africa, or maybe it's the first in terms of investments in the startup scene.
So we understand that Yaba is a vibrant place, right? Lots of talented young people, a hub of education, really a bustling center of Lagos. But how did it get started?
Yes, exactly. And we know that Rome wasn't built in a day, right? So definitely a lot of factors, a lot of players were involved at the very, very beginning to get Yaba to where it is today. And it's so interesting that our guests were really open about painting the picture for us and just letting us see exactly what happened and how Yaba is what it is today.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story. Let's hear from our guests.
So I founded CcHub with Bosun Tijani, who's now Minister of Communications Technology in Nigeria. And then very early on, we had a third friend, Tunji Elesho, join us. Our thinking when we were starting wasn't necessarily about tech. Our thinking was, how do we create a place where people who are passionate about solving problems in Nigeria can find the support that they need to get their ideas off the ground. Of course, prior to that, we had done a couple of businesses together. We were both very interested in positive change in Nigeria. One of our choices could have been, let's create a solution to a specific problem that we've identified. But I think by virtue of the work that both of us were doing at that time, so prior to starting CcHub, I used to work at the Young Foundation, which is the UK's biggest social innovation center. In fact, I think the concept of social innovation was actually, a lot of it was pioneered at the Young Foundation. And at that time, Bosun used to work for an organization called PERA, which worked with academics and researchers across Europe with commercializing their research. And so when we were starting, the thinking was, how do we combine the capabilities, the skills that we have to create something that is a vehicle for innovation that transforms Nigeria, a place where people who have an idea to solve a problem can go to get all the support they need to get their ideas off the ground. Before we started the hub itself, or the physical space itself, we actually started with a hackathon, a couple of hackathons. So in late 2010, we ran the very first ever hackathon in Nigeria where people actually had to build. It was called the Social Innovation Camp. We got 60 people into Enterprise Development Center in VI who gave us their space, found a few sponsors, and asked those people, come build a solution that solves problems. We got 6 ideas out of 50-something ideas that were submitted. On the whole, the interest was a lot from what was then the ecosystem. In March 2011, we did a second one just after the elections. It was called Tech in Governance. Invited people to bring ideas that could give citizens a bigger say in governance in Nigeria. Again, lots of interest. And so we spoke to a few people who had supported both events and said, we'd like to create a place where this kind of work can happen every day. And that's what led into CcHub. That's what led to the space. So the startup scene was starting to grow, but you have to understand this is late 2000s, almost 2010. So at that time, Facebook had happened, Twitter had just happened. So there was a lot of hype around, you could create a unicorn in a few years, and you didn't have to have gone through all the universities. We all know the story of Mark Zuckerberg. So we had a tech ecosystem where, again, maybe not unfortunate, maybe it's natural evolution. A lot of the ideas that were coming up at that time were, how do I create the Nigerian version of, you name the Western startup? I want to create the Nigerian Amazon. I want to create the Nigerian Facebook. I want to create the Nigerian this or that. So that scene, so it was early stages. You had some people who had worked in the technology services business. So I have a few developers. I get contracts from governments or banks or big companies. I had developers work on them. But you didn't have much in terms of product companies. They were starting to come up at that stage. Mobile apps were just about to become a thing. So Apple had only released the iPhone a couple of years before. The biggest conversations in Nigeria at that stage in the developer ecosystem was, should I learn Symbian, Nokia for Nokia, or Android or iOS? What should I be building for? So it was a virgin space. The telcos had started to come to Nigeria, the OEMs particularly. You had Samsung, Nokia had offices in Nigeria. You had people who were going to meet them to say, hey, I'm building this application. There wasn't yet an app store the way we know the app store right now. So you had developers building applications, going to meet those companies to say, hey, we built this. Can you preload it in your device? So it was early days. What was the ecosystem? The elements of it existed, but hadn't actually formed in the way it formed after we set up. I think the timing was good for us, because even though we're creating a space, our space initial thought wasn't we're creating a technology hub. It was we're creating a social innovation center. But of course, mobile and the power of the smartphone, we're starting to understand it at that stage. And we saw that it was going to be a good tool that people could leverage to get their solutions that they're building distributed. And at that time, I think for the telcos, for the Googles, for the Samsungs, the Nokias, it wasn't convenient to be having all those many conversations with so many developers. And so for them, it was useful to have a central point, a clearinghouse of sorts, where you could go to and you could engage the ecosystem at large. And the space we created became that. Yaba is an interesting location. So if I go back in history, long before us, and I go back to colonial days, Yaba was actually government reserved area of the native officers working with the British colonial administration in Nigeria. So whereas the colonial administrators were living in Ikoyi, which was on the other side of the lagoon, Yaba neighborhood was where the senior civil servants. And it's why if you look at the names of the streets in Yaba, you'd find Montgomery Street, you'd find Herbert Macaulay Street, you'd find McPherson Street, streets that are named after British colonialists or Africans who worked with the colonial administration. And Yaba has the site of the railway. Ido is the terminus of the railway line. Actually, the Nigerian Railway Company's head office is in Yaba. So historically, Yaba is the first place you touch on the mainland when you want to engage the island, which was the seat of administration in Lagos. So Yaba has lots of historical building and history, but it's also a huge chunk of which is zoned as residential. So the initial space we were looking at for what we're doing was actually on Lagos Island in Marine. And it fell through. And in hindsight, I mean, even at that time too, we were not super excited about it completely. And Yaba and the space we ended up setting up in was a mixture of intention and opportunity and luck. So when the space on the island fell through, we saw another space on Yaba, further up the road on Herbert Macaulay Way. Yaba for us was good from our analysis then, because it wasn't too far into the mainland, but at the same time, it also wasn't on the island. And to get to Yaba, you are halfway across Third Mainland Bridge. which, if you know the dynamics of traffic in Lagos, it's a good thing not to have to go across Third Mainland Bridge when you can avoid it. We were also excited that there was University of Lagos in Yaba. There was Yaba Tech in Yaba, which University of Lagos is the biggest university in Lagos. Yaba Tech is the oldest and the biggest polytechnic in Nigeria. Both were within proximity. And the population in Yaba, of course, by virtue of the fact that it was also universities, meant there were lots of young people in the neighborhood, which because, again, we're looking at developers who, in most cases, are probably they're not posh enough. They're not earning, that time they were not earning anything as much as they're earning right now. So the chances that they were living on the mainland was higher. And we wanted to make sure that what we're building was situated where most of the population was living, so that they're building solutions that the people that are actually going to use those solutions are just outside the door of the space. That's how we landed on Yaba.
Everyone knew Yaba to be that transit hub between the mainland and the island, and, I didn't know one paid attention to it, but I think it took the vision of Bosun Tijani, the current Minister for Communication, Innovation, Digital Economy, to see that it's an academic hub, it's an education hub. There is a polytechnic there are colleges of education there's a rail station there, so it's just fit and it's also not in the island. It's also not deep inside the mainland like an Ikeja, so it just fits perfectly for people who are trying to converge from everywhere to Lagos. And it didn't carry this. Nobody was trying to stitch together a tech story for Yaba, because there were also other organizations who were trying to avoid the expensive office spaces on the Lagos Island, the Victoria Island specifically. And so Yaba became so you had Parkway projects. People who had already started building tech things in there. But Co-Creation Hub, then, when we had the hackathon, it was in Victoria Island, the first hackathon by CcHub at Lagos Business School. And so by the time they moved to the thought of Yaba and they got space to Yaba, and Bosu just went out to rooftop and said, that's the university there, that's the polytechnic there, that's the higher college of education there, this is where we are. That's the secondary school there, that's the railway station there, that's a market there. It just felt like, oh yeah, we're building, this is an opportunity to really imagine this entire community and neighborhood. And it was exciting because before we knew it, different organizations and dealers started trickling in BudgIT. We also had our own space. Then we had Konga was there, and Jumia was there. Jumia is still there till now. And you now have the Life Bank. Different, and it was time around 40 to 50 organizations in different spots. WangoNet and the rest were there. And it started becoming a transformative story valley in some sort of way. Yeah. I think as Yaba, because Yaba itself has its history. It was in the colonial era, Ikoyi was where the colonial master stayed. Yaba was where the mid-level administrative staff and even some of the servants stayed back in the days. So even though it's an old place, it's properly planned. It has a great planning framework. Yaba doesn't flawed. It has a proper structure. We came out of CcHub and it was an interesting experience. I know we had a bit of fear that would we be able to rent our own space, because like I always said that CBO was running the biggest subsidy after the federal government. So the office spaces were cheap. There was free power, there was free internet. So you literally didn't pay for anything in some sort of way. And it was also growing the community. That was the strength of CcHub, powering the community. There were a lot of solutions that BudgIT built in the very early days that were selflessly built by members of Civic CcHub. Our website, our logo, even the logo, we just did a bit of modification till today. Today was built by someone at CcHub. And those are the kind of things we built in those times, because it was a community of people like Chuka Ofili. Chuka Ofili is a former technology lead in Floor to Wave, and we had people like Shola, a lot of people who we also were tech experts. They were solid developers prior to CcHub, but once they found a space like CcHub. Now they also now figure out that we need to work from the space. People like Yaba, when he came back to the country, he started working from CcHub. So it was, and that was the dream. That was the play, that people are able to have a space where they can work from, where they can build things. And it was just a huge, beautiful community of young people who just wanted to build dreams. And I think it has evolved over the years, because right now you find that a lot of tech hubs are now open. We even as BudgIT have a tech space called CcHub, where we deliberately focused on civic innovation, election work, access to legal systems, and also even incubate leaders. People like Gavo, the two called Citizens Gavo, came out of CcHub. So if CcHub is like the grandfather, we also now start giving back to giving as BudgIT. And I think that's the spirit of the hub, just to make sure that we're able to validate and other ideas and other dreams and give them opportunities to scale. The attraction now, for me, is still the fact that I still tag along that Boston's dream, of this is the education hub of the country. This is the education space of Lagos State. This is the art of education, and definitely possibly we could even say Nigeria. Apart from what you get in Ibadan, maybe the Lagos, Ibadan, UI, Jericho, Polytechnic exists, but this is where you need like Yaba Tech, you have colleges of education, you have the science technical colleges, you have secondary schools like Gregan Memorial and then St. Hans and people. And so this is the opportunities to still influence the academic space, because my own thinking was that there has to be that congruence, that connection between the tech education space and the technology space. We can't build one without that. That's our pipeline to be able to harvest talent. So that's always been my goal, to be able to. It's also connected to us because Yaba is also the hub of activism in Nigeria. So during the military regime, the NLC Secretariat, before we moved to Abuja, has always, even till now, is still in Yaba. Yaba is the center of where activism always began. The Ghana power means they started out protesting Yaba. These days people think about Jota or think about Tollgate and Lekki. Maybe that's for the GNC people, but for those who grew up back in the military, Yaba was also it's also a field of connection for us.
Okay, so it gives us a good idea then of the colonial legacy. Is not something I was around for, but it is something that in 2011, 2010, I was around in Nigeria at the time when it was starting to take off. So I remember engaging at least with BudgIT very early on when they were just starting out, and at the time when some of these hackathons were starting to really come through. And it was something which was quite interesting, exciting, innovative for the time which it was at. So I think it's really good to see how something that started off as people coming together with some good ideas, some sort of competitions and things, how that really started to gain traction and to get some sort of momentum. Faber, what were your reflections hearing all that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really cool to see something can actually grow. From the beginning, we heard that it wasn't really their intention. They just wanted to create change. They just wanted to do something about society. From just that little step, we have an entire tech cluster with millions employed. So I think that's really, really cool. And to see how BudgIT and even CcHub and all the other organizations that have come out, it's, to me, that's the key thing. That's the growth and the impact that the cluster is having and has had so far.
Yeah. And it's going to be really interesting now to hear from our interviewees, our guests, just to see how that cluster took off and how it really started to get that momentum. So let's hear some of their thoughts on that.
Yes.
So when we moved to Yaba and when we landed at our space, interestingly, when we landed our space in Habat Macaulay where we started, I actually went to Yaba to see a different space, and I was in a bus and I was going past and we saw this space and there was a toilet sign. So I got off at the next bus stop, went in, saw it, and I was like, yes, this is it. I called Boston instantly. We got it through support of some very, very helpful partners in the very early days. Indigo Trust in the UK, Media Networks, Bell Media's Foundation. Bell Media is co-founder of eBay. MainOne Cable Company, who had sponsored our hackathon initially and who supported us with internet in the space. Google, who supported us at our very first hackathon with our very first check of $1,500 who quickly came in when they saw what we're doing and said, yeah, we're happy to support Eric Schmidt Foundation. So all these players came in early, and a lot of what they saw was the vision that we cast, that we want to create a space where people who want to build solutions to real problems, real human being problems, can come to and get insulation from all the problems that stop you from creating in Nigeria. So power is taken care of. A good, decent working environment is taken care of. Quality of internet is taken care of. Where you need networks, we can find you networks. Where you need funding, we can find you funding. So that was what we were looking for. That was what we're looking at, because those problems existed, and they still exist now. Creators are still struggling with power. Creators are still struggling with quality of the internet. They're still struggling to get funding. They're still struggling to get access to networks. What we just created was an aggregator where a lot of all those things could be aggregated in one place, and people could come to and get the support they need to get their ideas off the ground. We were very intentional. We're very clear that the renting the space was not going to be our main source of revenue. And we needed a place that was going to be self-sustaining. And so what we charged was a very small annual fee for anyone who wanted to use the space. At that time, 30,000 naira, which was equivalent of maybe $100 for the whole year. And we kept that amount, I think, till I left CcHub 8-9 years later. Till I left day-to-day operations at CcHub, that is. But one of the things that we were also keen to do was to see how we could use empirical data in decision-making that transforms Nigeria. So research and commissioning research that's relevant to the kind of work we want to do, spark innovation, was going to be an important piece of the work we do. And so I think in 2012, 2013, we commissioned the research to identify clusters of innovation in Lagos State, in broader Lagos State, and cluster of innovation, not just tech. So what we're looking at was places that were 1 to 1.5 kilometer radius in Lagos, that has an aggregation of people in similar industries that was organic. So if you think about, and if you know the geography of Lagos, is a neighborhood called Shomolu, where printers converged. Anyone in the printing business would typically converge around Shomolu. If you go to Ikeja GRE, there's a convergence of the advertising and communications industry. If you go to Surulere, there's a convergence of Nollywood and Nigeria's film industry. And when we did that mapping, we realized that tech had started to converge in Yaba. So at that time, we were there. I think Paga Tech was there. There are a few tech companies here and there within that area. And so after that research, we decided to even dig a bit deeper, go in and speak to the people in those clusters to understand what made them aggregate in that space and what are the challenges they're facing and what could be their drivers for growth. When we did that for Yaba, part of things that came out from that budding tech ecosystem that was starting to form there was, well, power is a big challenge, good internet is a big challenge, traffic is a big challenge, and talent is a big challenge. So we then went to meet MainOne. And MainOne Cable Company is one of the companies that brought fiber optic and broadband into Nigeria. And at that time, they were giving us free internet, but they couldn't give us fiber internet because there was no fiber line in Yaba. And so from the top of our building, we had a satellite dish, which was pointing to their center in Victoria Island, which is across the lagoon. The problem with that was on days when the weather was bad and it was hazy, and we didn't have a good line of sight, and the quality of our network was bad. So we asked them, what would it take for you to bring broadband into Yaba? He said, yeah, it'd be a great idea, but first we have to pay for right of way, and then it will then take us time. And you know how it is in Nigeria, you want to dig the ground to put your fiber cables in. Every street that you're going to dig past, there's somebody that's trying to tax you. And they said, for us to make this investment of $2 million, we need to be sure that there are enough businesses in that neighborhood that can uptake the service. Otherwise, it's not worth our investment. At that time, the research which we did had gotten the attention of the Lagos State Government's Innovation Council, who saw that the research we had proactively done was going to be useful for their intention to make Lagos an innovation hub for West Africa and Africa. And so we had good rapport with them. So on the back of our conversation with MainOne, we decided let's take a proposal to Lagos State government to explain the business case for why they should support MainOne to bring fiber to Yaba. And so a couple of my partners, together with MainOne, together with Tommy Davis of Technovision, who also happened to be on the Innovation Council, who also worked from Yaba, went to the state government and did the presentation, said, look, these are the amount of tertiary institutions in this neighborhood. These are the amount of secondary schools in the neighborhood, primary schools in the neighborhood, health centers in the neighborhood, medical research centers in the neighborhood, the railway companies in the neighborhood. These are the amount of people in the neighborhood. This is the socioeconomic benefits of supporting this company to bring fiber into this neighborhood. And the sooner they can get it there, the better for the neighborhood. Within a couple of days, the Lagos State government waived the right of way. So they waived a $2 million fee for MainOne to bring the fiber into the neighborhood. Plus, they actually handheld them and supported them to accelerate the delivery of that project. So in 6 months, fiber optic cables had landed in Yaba. MainOne had turned on CcHub was on fiber optics cable. And all that progress, I guess, the wider tech ecosystem had started to see. Because somewhere in the middle of that conversation, while all of that was still happening, Jumia and their whole family of companies, their lease in the place that they took in Lekki was running out. And they were looking for a new place. And then somewhere in between there, they saw the space that was right beside the mall at Sabo, the Ozone Mall in Sabo, and took the whole building. By that time, tech had started to aggregate. Before you knew, when we did our next census, we had more than 70 tech companies that had aggregated in Yaba. Because it then made sense. There's talents, the developers are meeting out of CcHub. Idea Hub had set up next door by the federal government. There's now good quality internet in the neighborhood. They had seen what we'd seen around the talents, the young people in the neighborhood. It wasn't too far. So if you had meetings with clients in the island, you could get in a car and you're there with less than an hour, even with Lagos traffic. You have client meetings in Ikeja. You can get there. So they found, okay, this location is actually quite central. And so somehow the ecosystem just converged. Leadership. At that time, Lagos State had, arguably, in my own opinion, its best governor yet, in terms of Governor Fashola, who was very forward-thinking, very visionary, very principled, who was interested in moving forward that vision of making Lagos a catalyst. And what was interesting, something you'd rarely find in a project of that size in Nigeria, that a government will waive a $2 million fee. Naira will not change between anybody in the private sector and anybody in government. Because the government didn't do it at that time. And the funny thing is the government never even mentioned that in their scorecard or when they're talking about their achievements. Because it wasn't done to score political points. It was done because this idea makes sense and this business case makes sense. The company that's coming to pitch it is also coming at it. There was no, the government didn't see there was no straight, you couldn't say, okay, this is CcHub's financial incentive for requesting this. Yes, MainOne is a business. They had invested hundreds of millions of dollars to bring fiber optic cable to Nigeria to land on the coast. Everybody knew at that time their biggest problem was the last mile. How do you go from what has landed on the coast to actually get the last mile to people's doors? And we're able to show them something that fits into the grand plan that the government had. The fact that they had that innovation council who were also looking for something concrete that they could do to deliver towards the government's agenda. And the timing was right. I think a lot of things aligned at the same time. But I think the critical piece was leadership. Leadership from the CcHub and CcHub leadership from MainOne, because MainOne CEO was fully invested in this, but leadership from the state government and Innovation Council to say, okay, this idea makes sense. Let's do it. It's interesting. I saw the picture of the pitch that my colleagues did to the Lagos State government at that time. Someone who we didn't even know at that time, who was in the room as part of Lagos State government's team with the government, is the current governor of the state. Who at that time, I think he was either a commissioner or was someone working in government, but he wasn't government. It wasn't the state governor at that time yet. But there was leadership all through the state to say, okay, this idea makes sense. This idea is going to add value to the state. Let's do it. I think what often happens when ideas come is either the organization that is coming to pitch the idea to government is coming with a very selfish motive that is about me specifically and what I am going to get specifically, or they fall in the hand of people in government that are thinking from a very selfish place. What's in it for me specifically, not collective. And I think at that moment, that conversation, there was an alignment of lots of players who were thinking about the collective, both from our end, the CcHub, MainOne's end, but also the state government's end. So one thing that we were guaranteed of from in our early days was the inflow of students from University of Lagos who were coming into the events we were doing, the hackathons we were doing. And at some point, we even started hiring some of them into our team. So our long-time head of our engineering and design team actually came into CcHub for the first time as a 300 level mathematics student in University of Lagos. And it was from there he got into a hackathon, became a designer, started working on a few projects in the hub, and then we hired him, and then he worked in CcHub till he left for the Netherlands to go work at Booking.com. So there was an inflow of talent from the university that came through CcHub. It was a good place for talent from there who had ideas that they wanted to tell. And so I had students from there in lots of our hackathons from the very early days. Only a few years later, as CcHub grew, we started to do work that actually works with higher education institutions around innovation. And only at that stage did we then formally plug into those institutions. But in the early days, what we leveraged was a lot of the talents that came out of the institutions. That said, we did have a few conversations with key people in the institutions around some research that we were doing. And then in Lagos, in Yaba, there's the University of Lagos, there's Yaba Tech, there's a federal technical FTE, it's an technical education college that is there. But then there's a medical research center called NIMA, Federal Medical Research Center, that's also located in Yaba. Years later, we did work with them extensively around healthcare research, the epidemiology, and lots of research around tuberculosis that tied into what we were doing, but leveraging the technology that we're building and technology ecosystem. So there was room for synergy. But to be honest, a lot of what we did in catalyzing the ecosystem in the early days, some of that work could have been done by all the universities.
That concludes the first half of our Yaba Tech Cluster case study. In today's episode, we were able to explore Yaba as it is today. We also delved into its history, its early days, and then we concluded with how the cluster all began to form. Now, stay with us. In our next episode, we'll be bringing you the challenges that the cluster has faced, as well as lessons learned. In the meantime, you can connect with us through our social media channels, X, Facebook, and Instagram at Flywheel Economics. And also, check out our website for more content at flywheeleconomics.com. Until next time, this has been the Flywheel Economics podcast.